am so excited to welcome Rumaan Alam. Rumaan is the author of four novels, including Leave the World Behind, which was adapted for Netflix. His forthcoming book, Entitlement, follows Brooke as she begins a new job working for a billionaire's foundation and discovers just how the super rich live. Michael Deagler, Early Sobrieties. Michael's fiction has appeared in McSweeney's and Harper's. This is Michael's debut novel. In Early Sobrieties, a newly recovered alcoholic drifts from couch to couch in Philadelphia as he re-enters society as a sober person. Garth Risk Hallberg. Garth has written three books, including City on Fire, which was adapted into a series on Apple TV+. His new book, The Second Coming, follows a daughter in crisis and an absent father who wants the chance to save her. Susan Rieger. Susan is the author of three novels and a Columbia Law graduate with a career in academia. In her forthcoming novel, Like Mother, Lila overcomes her abusive childhood to great professional success, but the effects ripple through her family life. And Danzy Senna, Colored Television. Danzy, winner of the Dos Passos Prize and the Whiting Award, has written four novels, a memoir, and a short story collection. In her new book, Colored Television, Jane pivots to television writing when her career as a novelist goes into freefall, wreaking havoc in her marriage. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So I'm going to ask our authors some questions. We're going to do it round robin style. I'll call on them. And all the librarians out there, please put your questions in the Q&A. All right, so let's begin. A common theme in your books is proximity to wealth or power. Rumaan, this is obviously a major theme in your book. I particularly loved how you have Brooke on the one end, who seems to really buy into the freedom of this kind of unlimited wealth, and Gayela on the other, who rejects the concept from the outset. Do you see these two as opposite ends of the spectrum, and are they diametrically opposed?
Right. So the book is sort of, you see these two characters have a relationship to one other character's vast fortune. And I guess you're asking whether one character's rejection of that money and one character's embrace of that money represent different poles. But actually, what I hope the book is trying to explore is the way that money affects all of our lives. And a sort of rejection or acceptance of that is sort of neither here nor there. So money is sort of the atmosphere of contemporary life. I have a really low rent analogy, which is what Miranda Priestley says to her assistant in The Devil Wears Prada, where she says, like, you think that fashion doesn't apply to you, but it does apply to you. It sort of applies really broadly. I can't believe I used that example. Apologies to The Devil Wears Prada. But I think it's sort of true that money, no matter how much or how little you possess, you have to accept as a term of contemporary life that money is a factor, is a guideline that affects what you do and what your choices are. And I think it's really sobering to realize that. And I hope that's what the book is exploring.
Yeah, absolutely. Danzy, Jane seems to want the prestige of being a literary novelist, but the trappings of a successful career in the entertainment industry. Can she have both? Can she have her artistic integrity and have the house in multicultural Mayberry?
Yeah, that is the question that kind of drives her through this novel, because she and her husband have been living this kind of peripatetic life of bohemian artists in LA for 10 years, and they have two small children, and she's been dragging this unfinished novel with her the whole time, which she's calling the Mulatto War and Peace. And she and her husband, who's a painter, kind of look down on all of the people they knew who used to be artists, who've sold out to Hollywood, and they're pure. But of course, they're reaching middle age and they still don't have a home, and they have these two children that they're dragging around as well. And Jane, when her novel flops, she kind of finds herself in free fall, and kind of this desperate hunger it unleashes in her to be part of the kind of bourgeois, stable, upper middle class. And And there's also this creative urge to have her stories be read, and the stories of kind of being of this mixed race world that she's never been able to kind of make America see and acknowledge. And so she goes to television as much for the money as for the desire to be seen and heard. And in my novel, you know, like race and class are never, and in everything I've written really, race and class are never able to be disentangled. And the idea of like these things being part of the origin story of this country, that I don't think they can be separated. And so for her, it's like, you know, can she find a home for her stories, but also get rich at the same time? And I think, like Rumaan's novel, so much of my novel is preoccupied with real estate and with owning a home, and what real estate being kind of, you know, the defining feature of wealth, right? And going and then thinking about race and homelessness and how much that defines our relationship to this country, whether we own a piece of it. So this couple becomes a way for me to explore all of these questions of class anxiety and creative anxiety and representation.
All right, great. Susan, Lila fights her way out of a terrible childhood and home life to become hugely powerful and influential as an editor. She, of course, marries into old money along the way, but Lila herself seems pretty irrepressible. So did the money make a difference to her in her approach to life?
Well, Lila is, there are a lot of competing voices in this book, but Lila is the beating heart of the book. And she grew up poor. She grew up in a poor neighborhood. And one of the ways she tells her children this is by saying that all of her clothes came from Goodwill, except her underpants. She refused to wear somebody else's underpants. And she sort of has to get out of her house and get out of Detroit to make her way. Her husband, Joe, is a third generation, and he's an heir to a GM fortune. And one of the ironies of the book is that Lila's father is on the GM line, and Joe is GM royalty. But when she meets him, she doesn't know he's rich. Her childhood is so impoverished in certain ways that she doesn't know what rich looks like except in old black and white movies. And so she thinks he's upper middle class, but she's not quite sure what that is either. He dresses like everybody else. He wears khakis and sneakers. He drives an old Chevy. He's her TA in her history class. What does she know? She doesn't think about his money until she visits his house in Bloomfield Hills, and sort of kaboom, she understands what he is. Joe's money is a cushion, but it's not anything Lila cares about. She wants to make her own money. She wants to be self-supporting. And what she wants is success. That's what she wants. And of a particular sort. She wants to be an editor of a big newspaper someday. And she, in fact, tells that to the editor-in-chief of the newspaper she ultimately becomes editor, is that he asks her, what does she want? And she says, I want your job. And that's how she goes through life, wanting those things. But what she wants from her husband is his experience and opportunities. She tells her children she didn't know what artichokes were. She didn't know what avocados were. She didn't know what asparagus were, and those are just the vegetables. She didn't know how to write a book. She didn't know how to write a book, and she didn't know about theater. She didn't know about museums, and Joe has all that, and that's what she really wants from him. So Lila really remains who she is to the end, and she makes money of her own, and she worries about her children being rich, but I don't think money is important to her. Success is what she wants.
All right, thank you. Michael, most of the characters in your book are just scraping by. But I did notice whenever Dennis comes near wealth or stability, disaster seems to strike. Are wealth or stability within his reach?
Thank you. Yeah, that's the question, and that's a question I've wondered about myself for a long time. But yeah, Dennis he's recently sober. He was a blackout drunk for a long time, and that kind of precluded him from really ever achieving stability or wealth. And now that he's sober, he feels like he's fallen behind. He's lost all this time, and so he as in other areas of his life, he kind of just wants everything to be okay immediately. He wants not wealth, but comfort and stability immediately, which is impossible because those things sort of take time to accumulate. And one of the kind of central questions of the novel, I think, is him figuring out whether comfort and stability are things that he can achieve eventually, or if he's just kind of like dispositionally ineligible for them ever. And I wanted the book to kind of reflect the kind of economic experiences of my little millennial cohort who entered the workforce during the Great Recession. And a lot of the characters in the book are kind of languishing in the service industry, or they have these kind of scammy jobs that require them to sort of prey on their customers, or they just intern forever. And it's sort of the rare person who has found a kind of a traditional white collar job, or who owns a house. And when Monk encounters one of these people, he's very envious of them, and tries to figure out what they've done that he didn't do, and if there's a way that he can sort of turn back time and make the right decisions.
Great. Garth, both Ethan and Jolie have brushes with poverty and with extreme wealth. There's a visit to the Occupy encampment, for example, but then there's also a mysterious benefactor who gives Ethan a place to live on an estate. Does having brushes with both aspects keep Ethan and Jolie in balance?
I wonder if maybe instead it keeps them off balance. I feel like income inequality, or really inequalities of wealth and power, are sort of like the central social justice issue of our time. If you stand far enough back, they kind of feed into everything else. And I wanted to, I ended up setting the book during the Great Recession that Michael talked about, where all of a sudden this kind of, credit card fueled fiction that prevented those inequalities from becoming too glaring kind of fell away. And we were really faced collectively with this kind of precariousness. And I hear other panelists, as you talk, I hear the way that brushes with that precariousness leaves scars, whether it's scars because you're sliding back into it, or whether it's scars because you find yourself surrounded by these fabulous trappings that you can't quite keep up with. So Ethan as a character is from, a very impoverished and remote part of the country, the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And within that milieu, he has some relative degree of privilege. His dad runs a private school, so he's sort of exposed to people who are better off, but he really carries this, insecurity, kind of like Michael was talking about. He's an addict, and he's like, am I ever going to have stability? Unfortunately for him, he has a daughter. And so, he's got someone else he's got to be worrying about too. She has a relative degree of privilege in the sense that she's, her mom's a professor. Any professors on this call might chuckle to hear that as equated with stability, but, she has this ability to move through the other setting of the book, which is New York City in 2011, and she can kind of, you know, go into classmates' fabulous apartments and compare them to her own, you know, dumpy 2-bedroom. And so you're kind of getting this constant oscillation between wealth and privation. And I think it's very, it puts a lot of pressure on the characters.
All right. So another theme that came up quite a bit through everyone's book is rebirth. So Garth, we'll start with you this time. Ethan desperately wants a rebirth or a clean slate with his daughter. How does he approach this connection and transformation?
Badly, haphazardly, recklessly, and disastrously. So as I said, Ethan, you know, has been an addict since he was a teenager. He's now, you know, when the book opens, he's 33, and he and his daughter, their interactions for the last 3 or 4 years have been confined to a handful of Skypes. This is 2011, so Zoom's not a thing. You know, you're Skyping. And he's on the West Coast and she's on the East, and he's not really a factor in her life, except that she's really having a hard time at 13 and 14. And so maybe he is a factor there, and he feels like she's headed for the same kind of rough straits that he passed through at that age, and he's desperate to prevent it. But I think in your question, you use, interestingly, the phrase clean slate as a synonym for a kind of rebirth or rekindling of connection. And I think that's the problem. I think that he thinks that he can sort of charge back into her life and be like, let's draw a hard line under all of these, you know, under the past and just move forward. It's a very American way of thinking, I think. And I hope what the book dramatizes, and really what I discovered in the writing, is that a rebirth requires a reckoning. You know, it's not a wiping clean of the slate. It's an honest accounting of the past and a full exploration of what you can control and what you did wrong, what you should take responsibility for, and what are the things that you couldn't control and that you have to let go of. And so that's really the central drama of the book. Him discovering that that's the task, Jolie discovering that that's the task for her as well, and can they pull it off? And I hope that question hovers over the book right up to the very last scene.
Yes, absolutely. It does. Susan, many of your characters reinvent themselves in some way. Is it a matter of rebirth, or is it them making the world give them what they want?
You know, that question really struck me because I hadn't thought about it that way. But in fact, I think you identified it. There are a lot of very will-driven characters in my book who are almost completely without self-knowledge. They're not at all introspective. The epigram of the book comes from Stephen Fetcher, where it says, "Don't look back, something may be gaining on you." And the motion at all times in this book is forward, especially for Lila and Grace, who are very similar. Lila says about her daughter, Grace is just like me, but I'm nothing like her, which is actually, I think, true, because Grace has grievances against her mother for being negligent and not going to soccer games and not having dinner with the family. But Lila is always who she was. I mean, as a child, dealing with her difficult father, getting through Michigan, getting jobs on newspapers, she just barrels her way through. And it takes her to the end. Grace is a little bit more thoughtful. And there's a third one who's also very ambitious, which is Grace's best friend, Ruth, who's her college roommate. And Ruth is also very ambitious, but she's also driven by anxiety. which is something I think that the other two don't feel. They, not that they, it's not, it may be buried, it may be sub rosa, but they're just success driven and work driven. Work is very important to this book. Women working, and in their lives, it's often the dominating thing, especially with Lila. So good question. Thank you.
Oh, no, thanks. Michael, it feels a little like Dennis is getting a second life as he drifts through Philly and reconnects with people who only knew him before. Is each chapter or each couch that he's sleeping on a clean slate?
Thanks. Yeah, that's an excellent question. I should say the structure of the book is kind of like in every chapter he's staying with a new person, and it's sort of episodic that way. And that structure appealed to me because it kind of like mirrors the kind of recovery program axiom of taking things one day at a time. Like each day is sort of a new opportunity to be sober, which doesn't mean strictly like abstinence from alcohol, but to the kind of like live honestly, to live well. And sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. But there's always that opportunity. But as Garth said very well, there's kind of no such thing as a clean slate. Whatever happened yesterday happened, and you can address it or you can try to ignore it, but it doesn't go away. And I think that's that. It's very interesting that you also have an addiction novel, Garth. I'm very excited to read it. But there's that's a very inconvenient sort of reality for people recovering from addiction. Because the problems that happen in chapter 1 are still there in chapter 2, but there's also new problems in chapter 2, and it's sort of it follows him throughout his journey and until eventually there does need to be some sort of reckoning.
Danzy, Jane does seem to become a different person as soon as she starts thinking of herself as a TV writer. Is the industry itself what brings this about, or the shedding of her old project, or is it something else entirely?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question to think about for me, because I think my first draft of this novel, I had in my head even a kind of hierarchy of arts, and thinking of, like she and her husband sort of pay lip service to, like his abstract visual art and her opus, this 10 years in the making novel, are the real art, and then the television is down here. And at some point she teaches at a college, and she bemoans that even the English professors that she teaches with, who've devoted their lives to studying literature, spend their time around the water cooler talking about like what they watched on Netflix last night. Like television as kind of her worry as this is the novel of our time, and this form has taken over the way we used to think about novels. And so I think the binary gets broken down pretty quickly about art and what's high and what's low and what's real and what's false. But I also think that Jane has signs of a kind of crack in her even before she goes into television and gets swept up with this producer. And I'm really interested in not having sort of this pure figure who gets corrupted by Hollywood, but someone who's already got dishonesty in them and kind of gets drawn to and susceptible to this producer because of things that already live inside of her. And she already begins on a dishonest note with her husband, and tells him that she's only dabbling into Hollywood to gather more material for her novel, that she's exploiting Hollywood, they're not exploiting her. And the producer, of course, is this Black mega wealthy producer who's been tasked by the network, by the streaming service, to develop diverse content. And I was really interested in like reducing these ideas that I've grappled with in all of my books, like around racial identity and sort of class and history, and kind of reducing it all to content for streaming service, and like a sort of taking something so complex and making it into yet another thing to pitch at a meeting as a kind of get rich quick scheme, and sort of kind of the movement from this very pure idea of these questions of identity and politics and race, and becoming sort of the desperation that Hollywood brings out in people, and sort of Jane sort of finding herself like wanting to be the next racial specimen for Hollywood, and wanting them to exploit her and kind of pick her as the new race that will be sold on the market. Yeah.
Rumaan, I got the feeling reading your book that Brooke was going to maybe like shed a skin or transform into something else, some new version of herself. Is that what was happening? What was she becoming? And what prompted her to go through this?
I mean, I think in some ways that's what the book is about. I mean, the book is called Entitlement, and one of the driving questions of the book is whether a Black woman is in fact entitled to change or, you know, demand something from the world in the way that a white man is. That's sort of the drama of the book. What happens to her doesn't seem to me like a rebirth so much as an undoing. So maybe that requires a spoiler alert for my answer to that larger thematic question. But I don't know. It's funny to say this about a book that you wrote. Like, I don't really know what is happening to her, but I don't think it's great. Rebirth seems to me like such a that there's a positive connotation of, like, as in Michael's book, of like progress toward like wellness, or, you know, health or something. But I think that money, which is sort of the ultimate objective in my book, doesn't offer that promise to people. It doesn't offer salvation is not going to be found in money. And I think that this is a book about her experience of learning that firsthand.
All right. Garth and Susan, both of your books show the parent story and the child story kind of interwoven. So Garth, your book is almost like a mixtape or a collage with those pieces woven together throughout. Can you talk a little bit about putting those pieces together?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that strikes me about the process of, you know, trying to integrate the parent's point of view and the child's point of view is that I found it extraordinarily difficult. I have had the idea for this book rattling around in my head for probably 25 years, the germ of it. And when it came to me, it was Ethan's story. You know, it was a young man, a young father who had had a lot of hard knocks and maybe wasn't even a good person, and you know, struggling with what it meant to become a father. But the book really only took off for me when I, you know, discovered Jolie, and you know, she kind of like, I just remember the day at the writing desk where she came alive and just sort of took over the proceedings, and I was happy to be dragged along behind her for a couple of years of writing. But at a certain point, you know, I then had to tack back toward the father's point of view and say, well, how does this all look from his side? Is she seeing this clearly? And so, you know, I ended up, I guess, kind of staging the book in the tension between these two, you know, at first kind of irreconcilable points of view, and, you know, trying to find a way for them to struggle toward a place where, even if only for a moment, they could kind of see each other clearly. We've all been children of parents, and many of us have been parents of children. And so I think everybody on this call probably, senses how difficult that is. That, the hardest person to have empathy for are sometimes the people closest to you. It just felt like such a necessary project in the book because I found it to be such a necessary project in my own life as a son and as a father. So as difficult as it was to, negotiate these 2 points of view, it would have been much easier to have like 10 points of view somehow, but 2 was really, really hard. For me, it was immensely rewarding in the end.
And Susan, in your book, we have 3 different sections focusing on 3 different characters. Can you talk a little, how do these sections change our perspective as we read?
This is Like Mother is a book about 3 generations of difficult women, smart women, interesting women, but difficult, tied up in their knotty relationships with each other and trying to sort it out. Lila is the middle generation. But she's the first book because she insisted on it. It's sort of as Garth was saying, sometimes your characters just take over and tell you what they have to do, and you're really helpless to go along. And Grace is second because she's pretty powerful too, but she's so mad at her mother. Lila has to come first. And then Zelda comes third, the grandmother of Grace and the mother of Lila, who disappeared from Lila's life when Lila was 2. And she's more of a ghost haunting the book. And so she comes last because her absence is more important than her presence. And but I'm not going to say anything more about Zelda because that's a kind of mystery of the book and it's a through line. And I'm not going to spoil what little, tense action there is in the book that way.
Yes, please don't spoil it.
Right, but the other thing is, the book isn't written chronologically, and the first sentence, says, Lila Pereira died on the front page of the Washington Globe. Poof! I kill off my heroine right there, and I don't like to write chronologically, so you get bits and pieces of everybody as you go along. But that's how you really get to know real people too. You don't meet somebody and then sit down and go back to the egg and take them up through, kindergarten, high school, and you slowly, more and more intimate things are revealed, and they may happen at different times in a person's life. And so I try to do that. So giving the sections is a way of organizing that. There's more of Lila and more of her perspective. There's more of Grace in Grace, the second section, her perspective, and well, Zelda, you have to wait and see. But I think that's my next novel. I'm trying to write chronologically, and I'm resisting it. It's just not anything that comes naturally to me. I'm always going sideways in my books. So that's it.
Michael, in your book, Dennis is going through cycles or, episodic, an episodic nature, drifting through Philadelphia, almost like a wandering samurai type character. Did you have an archetype in mind as you wrote him?
Thanks. Yeah, wandering samurai might be a little more romantic than what he is, but I think he's definitely, I think fits into the wanderer archetype, which is probably one of the older archetypes in literature. I think he, is descended in some ways from some of the characters from like beat literature or existentialist novels, the kind of, willfully migratory, willfully lost characters who use their kind of itinerancy as a means of self-discovery. Somebody who read it wrote that it was kind of a road novel without the road, because he stays in one city the whole time. And I liked that. That kind of sounded true. And, you know, I guess it's like sort of maybe funny or sad that his like big journey of self-discovery is just like in South Philadelphia. Like, you know, he doesn't really get to go anywhere cool, but I think for him, you know, we're all kind of the protagonists of our own Odyssey, you know, and I think for him, it really is like a very, you know, he's on like this sort of spiritual quest, you know, into himself, and South Philadelphia kind of takes on this sort of metaphysical landscape quality, and it for him it really is like a, you know, kind of a struggle between like salvation and damnation, you know. But I, you know, I think for that's how you make any story seem important, is like the, you know, those stakes for the character need to really, you know, be very high.
Danzy, a lot of unhinged but completely believable things happen to Jane in LA. Is your story a satire, or is LA and the TV industry just unsatirizable?
That question made me laugh. I I actually think that anything is satirizable, and also that Hollywood is no more or less for me than any of the other worlds that I've inhabited. And I don't know that it's a satire, but it's definitely kind of a comedy. There's a bit of, I wouldn't say I've exaggerated things, but that my way of seeing the world is in all of my books. And whether it's like the 70s and the civil, sort of post-civil rights movement, interracial family, or Brooklyn in the 90s, I'm always seeing things with a slight tinge of comedy in my worldview. And I think that what I love about writing and comedy as a vantage point, and I don't really choose it, but it just kind of comes to me, is that it holds all of the other feelings I have, and it allows them to be accessed without overwhelming the story, my feelings of rage or alienation or anxiety or sadness. And so for me, you know, Hollywood is absurd, it has high stakes, it's got, you know, plenty to make fun of, but I would say that exists in everything I write about. And I'd also say comedy, you know, for me is really important to the work I do, because I'm usually writing about characters who are, like myself, of mixed race, who are Black and white. And that story, sort of since the beginning of this country, has been told as a tragedy, and a kind of maudlin tragedy of the mixed race figure as a tragic figure. And laughter and irony and comedy for me have been a way of reshaping that narrative and reshaping the gaze that looks on that narrative. The white gaze has seen it as a sad story, and the earnestness and the sort of violence of that earnestness is something I try to disrupt in my work. And to, I think when you're laughing at yourself, or you're laughing at those who see you in a certain light, you're sort of reclaiming a lot of power. And in that laughter is a sort of implicit survival. So for me, the comedy is very important in everything I write, and Hollywood was just one other space to see the absurdity in.
Great. Rumaan, reading your book, I got a sense of tension and menace that built throughout. How do you build this uneasiness into your story in a way that kind of draws people in and intrigues people without spoiling the ending?
It's so interesting to me that was your experience of it, because I also think that my book is really funny, and I felt this way about my last book too. And I say this all the time, and I feel like nobody agrees with me. So maybe what I think is funny is actually really disturbing to other people. But I think that like every writer only has access to the same toolkit, which is language. Like, I don't think there's any other way to do anything on the page. It's all you have. And so I think that there's a sense of distortion or, you know, instability in the book as it progresses. And I think it's inside of the language. I think it's inside of the word choice. I think it's inside of what the book is noticing. I think that it's all inside of it. And so yeah, I sometimes wish that I did have access to some other tool. Like when you see a film, the score communicates to you how you're supposed to feel. Like, you know, it will sound mournful or creepy and sort of indicate to some part of your brain that you're not even really aware of, that you're supposed to feel a certain way, or you're supposed to prepare for a jump scare or whatever it is. But the writer has a much smaller toolkit at their disposal. And so yeah, I think we're all working with the same thing. I do just want to say that I'm a little bit in shock that Susan is working on another book when we're all here talking about our forthcoming book. So I didn't want that to get lost in the shuffle, and I just feel like she needs acknowledgement as a role model to me personally for persevering like that.
Well, that's actually a great segue into it's Q&A time. So while we wait for some questions from the audience, I have some kind of possible questions for you guys. So we can go into what's up next for you. So someone like Susan, I guess, is working on another book already. I assume most of you are not. So are you going on a book tour? Do you have something exciting happening? Are you just, you know, booking a vacation to get through all this? Let's start with Danzy. What's up next for you?
I actually, you know, am against all of my psychological well-being, against my children's well-being. I've started another novel, and I feel badly about that, but I was compelled by something that happened in the way that things come to you when you're a novelist and you think this has to be a novel. So I've begun a novel, and we'll be working on that all summer before my book comes out, before color television comes out. And I also have been pulling together, I've written about race and identity as in a nonfiction context for my whole adult life. And so I've been doing a sort of selected essays collection about things that I've written over the last 25 years.
That's incredible. You look so relaxed and calm. I can't believe you have so many things happening. Susan, what's up next for you? Are you ready to talk about this new book?
I'm ready, sure. Right, sell early. The book is called, the book I'm working on is called The Original Husband. And it was the book I was supposed to be writing when I wrote Like Mother, because I couldn't get into it. I had an original husband, and I'm much older than the rest of you, and I really had to wait until he died before I could write it, because my sensibility is comic, I think, basically dealing with hard subjects in a comical way, and it was just too heartbreaking watching him on his way out. So now I think I'm ready to do it, and and the question is, and it's not my story at all, is, but what do you owe your original husband when he's on hard times and getting old, and your children are in their 30s and they just can't deal with him? Do you have to step up and do something for him? And I'm always interested in families. That's what I'm interested in. That's my my bailiwick, and so that's where I'm going. And also my agent is on my butt all the time to keep going. As I said, I'm older than all of you. I published my first novel when I was 67. So I'm a very late starter. So I have to keep going now.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, Garth, what's up next for you?
Susan, I love that premise. That what do you owe your original husband? It's like, so that's a thought provoker. Yeah, so I guess I've got Michael and I think we share a May pub date. These other people look very relaxed and chill because their books aren't coming out for a while. But also Danzy, because what's good psychologically for a writer is writing, which I've learned the hard way. So I tried to take a sabbatical like a couple summers ago, and it like totally didn't work. So I try to always be writing just for sanity. So I'm kind of like trying to finish a book of stories right now. I have a story that I refer to as My Little Monster that I've been working on for years and years. That's a retelling of a very famous text. And that's preparatory to the next novel, which I hope to start on after book tour, which is a retelling of an even more famous text that I've been thinking about for 25 years also. So that's what's next for me.
Very exciting. Rumaan, what's up with you? What's next?
Well, I didn't know I was going to be doing a panel with a bunch of show-offs here, a bunch of hardworking, serious writers.
Oh.
I feel a little, I feel like I go through these cycles of input and output, and I'm like a little drained from the experience of writing this last novel, and I sort of need a break. So I find that I've been really like eager to read and to see movies. I've seen a lot of movies, and to see art, to see theater. So I've been sort of like shoving things in my head, which tends, I think, that sort of yields unpredictable. It is too soon to predict like what results that will yield. And I am trying to do other things. I'm trying to write a short story, which is something I'm really terrible at, it turns out. And I'm also trying to write a screenplay, but I'm mostly doing those are mostly engagements just sort of to keep, like Garth said, like you have to, it's sort of like psychologically damaging weirdly if you don't do that. And it doesn't have to produce anything. It's more sort of like an exercise, like when a marathon runner goes for like a 1 mile run. I sort of feel like that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Oh, well, there's a lot of excitement about you, Rumaan, in the chat. So take a look at that. But we're almost out of time, and I definitely want to hear from Michael. Michael, what's up next for you?
Yeah, I'm not working on anything. I'm being, I'm far less impressive than the rest of these guys. The main thing for me, I have my little East Coast book tour at the beginning of May. And I don't really have like a fan base or anything. So if anybody in the audience here, if you're in like New York or Philadelphia or DC and want to come see me read a little bit from my book, I'm trying to, fill some bookstores. So that'd be much appreciated.
Yes, everyone, please go see Michael on his book tour. His book is excellent. And all of your books are excellent. I am so privileged to have been able to read them early, and I encourage everyone in the audience to read all 5. They're really all fantastic. But we are out of time. So thank you, everyone. This has been a fantastic discussion. And to everyone in the audience, if you haven't already, make sure to visit the booths in the exhibit hall. And next up is the afternoon keynote with Deborah Harkness. All right, thanks everybody. And thank you to our authors. You guys were all fantastic. Thank you for speaking with us about your forthcoming novels.